bodies of the dead were left on this top surface for birds like carrion birds and scavengers to eat away the flesh. Explain the history of the most crucial, the most respected food from Cornwall. Now I won't go through it 9 times because I don't want to get pregnant. Wow. Welcome to Cornwall, an ancient Celtic nation on the very tip of England, Great Britain. If you keep watching this video, you're going to learn some ancient history, some culture, and we're going to see some really beautiful places in one of the most spectacular and famous spots in the whole of the UK. So hopefully I can make a short, informative vlog and introduce you to the land I love the most, which is Cornwall. This is an ancient house built and inhabited by ancient Cornish people. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history. We're going to have a little look around this super old house. So this is the entrance here. Now the house is much bigger than what you would think. This house is just shy of 2,000 years old. This is what they think it would have looked like. So it's one house and it's a courtyard house, which is only found in this area. And it would have had either earth or straw roofs. You've got really high walls here. You see how high these walls are. They probably would have been a bit higher as well, but they go over me. So this would have provided shelter from the wind. In the winter they would have kept animals in here. They would have spun wool in here. And over here we have an ancient grinding stone. So this would have been used for grinding wheat to make flour. So you can see here that there's a nice little circle. They would have had sort of a rounded boulder like a river stone, and they would have ground the wheat in here. And these are in all of the houses around here. This is literally about 1,700 years old. So 1,700 years ago, someone else, maybe one of my ancestors, would have been touching this. So I'm touching something that they would have touched thousands of years ago. Now the ethnicity of these people are not English. So we're in England, but Cornwall is very different from the rest of England. It's almost like its own nation. It was once its own Celtic nation of Damonia. This is an ancient kitchen. They would have prepared the food here, right here, and over here would have been the furnace or oven. So you can see that it's all built up, and it actually comes in more. It probably would have came in more with stone and then a hole to, you know, allow the smoke to go. For the 400 years that this village was inhabited, imagine how many meals were cooked in here. And this is basically the bedroom over here. This is the main room. So imagine how many ancient peoples were conceived here. You know, this is the bedroom. Just how many people were conceived here. You know, how many people were born in this room thousands of years ago. These are not tiny pieces of granite. They're absolutely huge. Like, look at this. So it would have taken a lot of effort to build this house. There's tons and tons and tons of stone here that they would have moved, and it's quite a considerable, you know, piece of architecture. It's still here after nearly 2,000 years. It's just really cool. So this was a big family, so they had quite a large house apparently, and this little room here would, well, they believe, it's all conjecture, but they believe that you would have had chickens or small livestock in there, maybe lamb and sheep or something like this. And all of these little buildings or rooms would have had roofs all over them. It's just this central courtyard that didn't. But one thing that we need to tell you is that in Cornwall, mining is a huge part of its history. So this land in Cornwall is rich in tin and lead. There's some gold here and other metals, and this was in the Bronze Age. We've got my mates here. There's Molly. Say hello to the subs. They're always asking where you are.
Hello, I'm just here. I'm always here.
There was a lot of minerals here and metals. This land is very rich in metals, and so for thousands and thousands of years, these Celtic peoples, these Britons, would actually trade with places like Brittany in France, and the Cornish tin would actually get so far that it could get to the Mediterranean and things like that. So they found shipwrecks in the Mediterranean, which is quite far. They've actually got what they believe to be a forge, an ancient forge where you smelt tin. And the reason why they believe that is because of the shape of this. So this is believed to be where the fire would have been. You got these huge stones here. It was a resource for the locals here. Many tribes actually would have got rich, and the tribes that would have got rich would have become the kingdoms, the ancient kingdoms of these local areas. I need to explain the history of the most crucial, the most respected food from Cornwall. So, like I say, this is a Cornish pasty. The pasty is a pastry dish. It's sort of like a pie in that there is a filling inside a pastry. Now, the typical one in Cornwall that is most traditional is steak, potato, turnip and onion. Now there's no gravy in this because the juices of the meat actually mix in with the flavour of the onion, the potato, and it becomes sort of stodgy. So there's no gravy added to it, but the juices and the moisture of the meat steams in there and creates a nice sort of gravy. The reason why it's this shape supposedly is because miners' hands were very dirty. There's arsenic and very poisonous minerals in the land that they were mining. So it is believed that the miners would hold the pasty by the crust. You see, this is like a very thick crust here. We call it a crimp. They would hold it by this crust as a handle and eat like that. They would eat all the way through it and throw the crust away. Now, this is in all of the books around Cornwall, but what's quite controversial is there seems to be absolutely no evidence so far of miners actually wasting food. Miners were very poor and pastry cost money. Butter was expensive, so it's quite unlikely that they used this as a handle. What actually is believed to have been the case is that they had a cloth, a pasty cloth, so they would hold it in a cloth to stop their dirty hands from poisoning their pasty. Crust is somewhat of a mix between a short crust and a puff pastry. It's somewhere in the middle. So you have here bits of meat. Now this is actually a vegan one because I couldn't get hold of the right one. This is not a pie. The textures of a pasty, due to its shape and its thickness, the difference in thickness from the crust to the middle part, these all produce very specific textures and flavors that you can only achieve with the shape of this pastry, this pasty. They'd be hot and they used to put them in their pockets. They'd perfectly fit in their pockets and they could stay warm for up to 8 hours. They would have a little piece of crust, and when they were down the mine, they would chuck it down the mine. And the reason why is because there's something called knockers, which are basically a potentially malicious spirit down in the mines that were blamed for mine collapses and things like this, explosions. So what they would do is they would feed the knockers, feed the spirits. This is sort of an animist belief. You'll find this in Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia. Like for example, the spirit houses in Thailand where you give food, there's very similar sort of belief to that. Sometimes you'd have pasty makers down in the actual mines, in the shaft, and when they were ready, when it was lunchtime, they would shout "Oggy, oggy, oggy," and then anyone that wanted a pasty would shout "Oi, oi, oi." Right, let's test it, because one of my mates are up there. "Oggy, oggy, oggy." "Oi, oi, oi." "Oggy." "Oi." "Oggy." "Oi." "Oggy, oggy, oggy." "Oi, oi, oi." So that's like a chant that's come from the pasty sellers that would shout "Oggy, oggy, oggy." Anyway, let's have a little look at this building. This is an engine house. So this would have pumped out water from the main shaft, which I believe is somewhere over there. I couldn't quite find it. It's been filled in. Now, I'm not an expert in mining history, but I would like to show you in here. So there would have been an engine in here. This is why it's called an engine house. It's very old and sturdy architecture. It's not been used for a very long time, but it's still here. Now what we'll do is we'll go around the other side. But tin mining and lead mining have been super important to the Cornish economy for thousands of years. This looks like a chimney, so I'm assuming because they used steam power, they had steam engines in this, I'm assuming that this would have been some sort of fire or something that would power the engines. This place here is called Menin Tor, this stone, and this is, as you can see, a stone with a hole in it. We don't really know the ancient reason why this was put here. In fact, it's not even been put in the original position, it's been moved. So these stones here and this one have been moved, and it's believed that these stones were part of a stone circle, much like Stonehenge. There's loads of them around here in Cornwall, so it's part of a Stonehenge really. The past few hundred years, the locals believe that this is a stone of fertility. It obviously represents the female sort of side of the universe with its hole. Probably won't go into it too much more than that, you probably understand. But yeah, it's believed that if a woman passes through this backwards on a full moon 9 times, they will actually become pregnant. And if they are pregnant and they do it, they will have a good birth. And farmers believe that if they go through it either 3 or 9 times, there's various different beliefs, that their back pain will actually be healed. So this is an ancient stone, and it's still significant really in today's Cornish culture. People still come up here and come through it. Some people may even believe in its ancient or probably more modern beliefs of healing. We don't really know the ancient reason why this is here, but I did read online that this is supposed to be a natural hole, but it looks so perfect. I'm not even sure if that can be true, but maybe that's why it was such a significant stone, because it's such a rare stone to find. I'm gonna go through it 3 times because I've got a bad back, so let's see. I'll report back in a few days if it's done anything. Now I won't go through it 9 times because I don't want to get pregnant, but also the local farmers go through it to try and get a good crop because it's a fertility symbol. So one more time. Oh, it's quite uncomfortable actually. It's much smaller than it looked on the pictures online. Oh! So this is one of a few ancient sites that we're going to be visiting. We're going to go to another one. We're going to go to an ancient tomb in a minute with a very funny history. However, that was the Menin Tor, which is Cornish for hold stone apparently. So there you go. But yeah, the inhabitants of this land believed in many different mystical things. They were animists, they were pagans, they believed in many different gods of nature. So on the way up to Menin Tor, this is a footpath. It's actually an ancient road. They believe it's somewhere between 3,500 to 5,000 years old. So it's a Bronze Age to Neolithic age road. These significant stones up here, they're actually really close to this ancient road. It's quite cool to see that it's still here. And these field boundaries here, which you can't really see because the vegetation's growing over them, these will be most likely ancient field boundaries. They could be, probably are as old as the road, or they're around that time. This whole area, there's so many ancient field boundaries, and in fact all over Cornwall as well there's loads of ancient field boundaries. Really interesting. I wish I knew which ones they were so I could point them out, but not exactly sure. These are the remains of an ancient tomb, a Neolithic tomb from the Stone Age. Could be 5,000 years old or more. This tomb was built before the pyramids and before even metal tools. It is that old. No one knows its exact date. So it has a huge capstone on it, and this is referred to as a quoit. So this is called Menin Quoit, and it's named after the big 13-ton capstone on it. Now it looks very different because it collapsed in a storm a few hundred years ago. I'm not quite exactly sure when it was, but it was a couple hundred years ago, somewhere around there. It collapsed in a storm. So it also was propped up by this large stone as well, but it snapped. You can see it broke in the storm, so they couldn't use that to keep this propped up. Now before the storm, you could ride into this tomb on horseback with no problems. It was that tall. But over the years, treasure hunters have dug it out, dug the foundations out, it's collapsed, and this is what we have left, unfortunately. But yeah, this would have been a very, very significant religious site. Just imagine this. This is 13 tons. This is a granite slab. Imagine in the Stone Age, before there's even metal tools, imagine moving that 13-ton stone and even finding it, because it's a very unique shape. It's a perfect sort of flat stone. And what some historians believe is that bodies of the dead were left on this top surface for birds like carrion birds, scavengers, to eat away the flesh, and then the bones would be collected and potentially left in the tomb for some time. It's all very mystical. No one knows exactly how it was, how rituals were performed, but we know it was a very significant place because just how much work and energy would have had to have gone into moving these stones here. But it would have been more of a room, so there are lots of stones around here. Quite often farmers in the past, in the history, have stolen these stones and broken these stones, these monuments, because they act as quarries for materials for building. Basically, it's what happens all over the world to ancient buildings. Over the history, cheeky buggers have come and stolen the materials for building their own houses and things, because it's much easier than going to a quarry and taking it out. This has already been made. And one of these quoits in the area, I'm not quite sure if it was this one, was nearly destroyed by a farmer that owned the land. Now, the farmer wanted to build a house for his cattle, an animal shelter in the field, so he thought he'd break up the quoit and use it for his walls. So he was in the process of breaking one of these quoits up in this area, and the locals believed in pixies, Cornish pixies. Now, these are believed in popular culture now, in modern culture, to be friendly spirits or friendly beings, but actually for most of history, pixies, Cornish pixies, have been malevolent or evil. They can inflict harm. And so it was believed by the locals that the pixies resided in this area, and that if this was destroyed, it would bring curse, it would bring very bad luck to the community. So the community went and told the local vicar what was happening. The vicar rushed down to whichever quoit it was, rushed down to it and told the farmer to stop what he was doing, because he was scared of what the pixies might do. And what actually happened is the church ended up funding the farmer's barn. So instead of destroying one of these ancient quoits and annoying the pixies, maybe bringing on bad luck to the community, the church member, the vicar, that should not be really pagan, because that's a pagan thing, actually paid for the barn, which seemed to be the only event in recorded history where the church, the Christian church, has worked with mystical beings. It's a very interesting, misty day today. It's very atmospheric for this. Maybe the pixies knew we were coming and thought, oh, we'll put on a show for them. I need to show you a very famous Cornish dessert called a cream tea. So what you have is a plain scone, a plain all butter scone, and then you have this. This is the main ingredient, the most important ingredient, and that is clotted cream. Now, you have to have it from Rodder's Farm, which is the most sort of famous, biggest clotted cream company in Cornwall. This cream is like a really thick double cream, but then look at this. Look at the yellow in that. It's really thick, and it has a crust on it. It has like almost like a crunchy crust. Not quite crunchy, but it has a crust. Imagine cream having a crust. You get this really thick.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
I just nearly messed up, guys. I just nearly broke the golden rule. So here in Cornwall, you must have your jam on your scone before you put your cream. Now this is really important. This is part of the Cornish identity and culture in their food, and that is the jam must go down first. I've just destroyed me scone. Look at this. This is god awful. Right, let's just do that. Jam on your scone. Okay, and then you put your clotted cream. Now over in England, over in Devon, they do cream first, and it's a big debate between us. Right, come on then, get in on this. So it's like a crumbly, thick cream basically, and the more yellow it is means the better the grass that the cows have been fed. Look at that. I haven't had a cream tea in ages. Look at that seagull. Good, take my cream tea. Yeah, bloody seagulls round here are vicious, I can tell you that. Proper breakfast, builder's breakfast tea, that one. It's an all butter fluffy scone. It's really, really nice. It's moist. It's a dense, fluffy dough. And then you've got the sweet strawberry jam on there and a really dense, rich, fatty cream. So look at this. You get your tea. Lovely that. Wow. Wow. Now that's a Cornish cream tea. When you come to Cornwall, you've got to have one. You've got to have it with Rodder's clotted cream and some strawberry jam. Right, this is Molly's first cream tea in 3 years.
Here we go.
Proper
Which
Cornish.
one do you go for first?
Whatever you want, babe. No rules about that. Just make sure the jam's first. Good?
Better than I remember.
Yeah. If you look around all of the coastline of Cornwall, it is very rugged. It's granite cliffs and very, very rugged, hilly, rural regions. Thousands of years ago, it used to all be forests, really, but it got cut down. Started cutting it down about 10,000 years ago, after the Ice Age had receded further up north on the planet. But anyway, Cornwall is very different to a lot of England because it is so rugged and it is so isolated down here. The people down here, for the majority of history, have just been miners and fishermen and farmers, basically. Really hard outdoor working people. They're really tough people around here. They do have a language that nearly went extinct, but in recent years it has had a bit of a revival, and there are living people that are fluent in Cornish, which is an ancient Brittonic language, a Celtic language. Cornwall actually traded more with Celtic tribes in France, in Brittany. They shared the same sort of language, very similar language. And so they were actually ethnically, linguistically, economically closer related to people in France than the Anglo-Saxons of England. So that's an interesting one. And that kind of has still followed down a little bit, whereas Cornwall is considered England. Everyone here would consider themselves English, but first they would consider themselves Cornish. This is a really old house. The actual top of it comes out more than the bottom of it, which is really, really old and traditional. So to get more space in townhouses and villages like this that are built up, they would have actually had floors that came out further and further, the further up that you actually went. So this would probably come out even more back in the day, and then further up they would come out even more. So it's like an inverted step coming out, and so people can actually shake hands at the top of there. At the top of the house they can shake hands. At the bottom they can't even touch each other with a sword. That shows how clustered some of these houses can be, and that's partly why the fire of London, the Great London Fire, was so bad, because all the houses were so close to each other. But check this out, these are all stone houses, so made out of stone and timber, just like any old house, any traditional house in Cornwall. This is it mangle?
No idea.
What's it called?
I don't know.
I don't know what the name of it is, but this is for, yeah, I don't know if it's a mangle. This is for getting rid of water, so drying clothes. So you put the clothes through here. Somehow you change this so that it comes down more. I don't know how you do it, but you do it so it comes down further and further and further. And it's not a pasta maker, so if you're Italian you probably looked at this and thought it was a pasta maker, but you put your clothes through it and then you turn this. Go on then, Molly.
I don't think it does turn, does it?
Oh, they've locked it. So then you would be able to turn this and basically just really smudge the clothes, smudge all the water out of them. And for some reason all the wood round in Cornwall is painted black. All the timbers, all the wooden timbers are painted black, and the cottages are typically painted white, which is very interesting because the flag is black and white. Look at this house, it's sat on top of nothing. It's just an alleyway. It's really, really cool. So you see here, this is a big beam and it's black. I don't know why these aren't painted. They don't even look like they're treated. You can see some woodworm in there actually, but these are really old timbers. This is very stereotypical of the architecture in this local area. And if you watched any of my Himalayan trek series, when I was going on about Cornwall and how much Nepal looks, the architecture looks like the architecture where I grew up, now you can see this is very, very similar. You see this? They're all painted black. You got all these houses around here, so all the tourists have loads of troubles getting their cars around here because they're single lane roads and it can be an absolute nightmare in the summer. In the 1700s there was a group of pirates that came over from the North African coast, the Barbary pirates, like basically like not Christian pirates, they were Muslim pirates. They came over here and they tried sacking the whole of this town. They wanted to steal as much treasure and gold from it as possible. The local town officials had found out before and so told everyone to hide in the local orchards and outside the town of Loo. However, the pirates somehow caught around 80 men. They enslaved them 80 men, took them all the way to the North African coast and sold them into the slave trade, into the North African slave trade. So there were 80 Cornish men from this little old town and they were sold into slavery on the northern coast of Africa. Cannon you can see outside the museum is actually from Finland, but Loo did have several cannons located on the seafront for protection against numerous potential and real invaders over the centuries, such as them North African Muslim pirates. These cobbled stones that you can see here, they were brought in from ships that were using it to weigh down their ship so that it wasn't lopsided. So what they did is when they didn't need them, when they came into this port, is they actually loaded them off and they used them here in this town as part of the road. It now is just tarmac, but this would have all been cobbled. And this all comes in from the ships, it was their ballast. Anywhere you go in Cornwall, if you go to an old town, not like a modern built town, then you'll be basically feeling exactly this. They're all single laned roads. You can fit a horse carriageway through it. It's all made out of stone or rock and timber and just really, really pretty. There's Molly following behind. Won't be on camera though. Motto of this county is all for one and one for all. Their saint is St. Piran. This is the Cornish emblem. Probably not actually called an emblem, but something else. Molly just said maybe it's a coat of arms. Probably is, isn't it?
I don't know what makes it a coat of arms, it's quite shape.
You see there, Smuggler's Cot restaurant. So cot is like what a baby sleeps in. Smugglers are the people that illegally brought all of the luxurious goods onto the coast from the ships and didn't pay any tax to the government, to the crown. You got Smuggler Cottage here. So this illegal sort of smuggler's trade is inbuilt in this history of this county. I'm going off to Bristol to go to France tomorrow, so I'm really, really late. I just want to show you a local church. So in Asia, everywhere I've gone, they all have local buildings like palaces and temples. This is our version of a wat. And if you hear this, that's the bell. That is the local bell tower. So in Asia, where you have bells and drums, literally for Buddhist temples and Hindu temples, we also have that ancient tradition. Ringing the bell, the religious bell, is a very ancient tradition that in many cultures. This is the bell tower, and the bell tower became quite popular in the medieval periods. So this tower, this church could have been here before then, and this tower may have been built anywhere from sort of like around the 15th century, 16th century kind of thing. This is a very typical church. We have churches in all our towns, all our villages, the same density of Buddhist Wats and Hindu temples in Southeast Asia, Thailand and all these places. We have the same amount of churches everywhere. Every small community have their church or their chapel, and you can tell that people just used to be a lot smaller back then, because this would have been a big door, and I can only just fit in it, and that's a big one. You can see the granite around the door frames and around the window frames, and this is slate. You can see the layers, sedimentary rock, I believe. Hopefully got that right. These are gravestones. So in many of the churches you'll have gravestones, little tombs and things. Before the internet, we used to run around and see if we could find the oldest tomb. That used to be one of the fun things to do before the internet. Now this is an acorn, and this is growing on an oak tree, which is very important to the ancient people of Britain. These oak trees were considered in some way as a god. Very important. Used them to build all our British Navy ships. And you can see here, this is a very simple stained glass window. You see, it's a very simple one. What they do is they actually have it cut up into pieces, and they glue it together almost with lead. This is lead. You can see that it's oxidizing and it's going white. It's actually quite poisonous for you. I don't know how old this church is. I don't even know the name of it. It's just we stopped. I thought it'd be cool to show you a church. We stopped just on the way to our house, and we'll go in the church as well. I'll show you. People always go, oh, you wouldn't go into a church with your camera on. Well, let's go show it. Let's check out some of these graves though. This is a cool gravestone. So they're made out of slate. So rest in peace, John Thomas Snell. Sorry, John Thomas Snell. Let's say his name correctly. Died on September 17th, 1863. So in 1863 he was buried here. A lot of the stones actually get moved because they run out of land. I don't know what goes on, whether they can't, I don't think they dig the people up, but a lot of the stones get moved, and I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. So this is the clock tower. The bell will be up there. On weddings they will ring, and on Sundays they'll ring. Different times of the day they will also ring. But you can see the architecture here. Stonemasons of Europe were considered in the medieval time as quite holy people. They weren't holy in the same way that a vicar was holy, but because all these houses of God, so this is a very small, very simple church. This really is a tiny, quite insignificant church in terms of architecture. It's just very plain, very simple. But some of the cathedrals that in a month or two I may be able to show you, some of those cathedrals are outstanding. So people believed that because these were the house of God, and it was very hard to carve this stone, you needed great skill, and the carpentry, the stonemasons were considered that sort of almost link between the house of God and God himself. Now we've got big heavy doors in here, so I'm gonna have to be quiet if there's people in here. But this, look at the thickness of that door. Huge wooden door. Hundreds of years ago, it definitely would have been made out of oak. I'm not sure what it is made out of. Now, in the UK, you don't take off your shoes when you enter a church like you do in Asian temples, but I have anyway, because for me that is a sign of respect, so I'm going to do that anyway now. I'm too used to doing that in Asia. So this is, like I say, a small community village church. And we have the altar at the front. And this is all very, quite Gothic in its style. It's the type of architecture that is. I'm not going to go all the way to the front because I don't know if that's rude or not. But that is, you can see a crucifix there. This is the altar. This is where everyone sort of faces. You can see these are called pews. This is a church pew. And it has a cushion here for praying. So you would sit here like this with your congregation, with your community on a Sunday and listen to the leader. And then when you need to pray, you use this, and you're like this. You're kneeling down and praying like this. And yeah, it's really cool. Lots of nice intricate wooden carvings and stuff. Like I say, this is a very plain compared to some of the buildings I will show you at some point on this channel. Going to France soon, so tomorrow actually, so won't be able to do that. There's an organ up there. That is an organ. It's very similar in some ways to a piano, and it's very often raised above the congregation. Now there's some crucifixes here. There's a ladder here. And there's a door going up into the area where they would play the organ. The organist would go up there, but it's locked, unfortunately. They got these huge granite stone carvings. Now, a lot of the architecture, a lot of this stone church and castle architecture that is famous in England actually comes from France, which is quite interesting. So the Norman conquest in 1066, the Anglo-Saxon, the English king, lost control of the UK in the Battle of Hastings. And so the Norman king, and the Normans are a group of Vikings that settled in the north of France. They brought over their stone architectures, their more permanent architectures. We had stone architectures, but not quite like this. A lot of it comes from the influence of the Normans when they colonized this country. They colonized it and brought over their stone structures, because obviously when you steal a country, you know, you're going to want to bed yourself into something very secure. And so, you know, wood and mud did not do the trick for them. So they brought it over, and a lot of what you see in British architecture comes from the French, and even before that from the Romans, because they colonized Britain as well. But here you've got some more stained glass windows. Now the stained glass windows are more meant for when you're in the church. So you can see that they look very beautiful. So you've got St. George, and he seems to be slaying a dragon. You've got St. Andrew here. These are all stories of saints. So I guess you would have like a sadhu in Hinduism, or a monk in Buddhist, an important monk. They're sort of like this. All these saints are people that are considered to have performed miracles, and so they're celebrated. So St. Piran, for example, is the saint of Cornwall, and he was supposedly an Irish saint that found the tin in the granite here, the tin in the earth, and supposedly the white and black Cornish flag is the white tin going through the black granite and the black rock. But there you go. That's a very simple church that you find in Cornwall, very stereotypical. Hope you enjoyed it. Look at the door on this. Seems that all of the architecture seems very medieval, because most of these buildings would have been erected, or at least started, in medieval times, and if not, then they would have probably been built on foundations of older, more ancient churches. And look at this roof, actually. It's very old carvings, and they probably would have been painted in its heyday when they were original. But there you go. That's a British church, a place of worship. So I was going to get stuck in there, but there you go.